Welcome to another edition of Crime Time with DutyRon. I am a retired New York City police detective with 20 plus years of law enforcement. And ladies and gentlemen, if you like all things true crime related from a police perspective, please consider hitting that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you will get all things DutyRon and Ed Wallace when I go live or upload another video. Tonight we have a great live stream for you guys. We have from Knoxville, from the Body Farm, Dr. Murray Marks. He's a fan favorite with Crime Time with DutyRon, but we will be introducing him shortly. We have Ed Wallace, who has just joined us. I had to remove him for a minute because he was grabbing something. Ed, good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. Forensic Anthropology 101. Ed has got some props for the show tonight.
That's right. Yes. Here we go.
Excellent. We want to say a special thank you to the Patreon supporters, the channel members, and all of the folks who positively engage in this audience. It is what makes Crime Time with DutyRon great. We appreciate the user feedback and the engagement. It is just instrumental in making this thing work. So without the interaction from you guys, we have nothing. So thank you. I tip my cap to all the subscribers, the Patreon, and everyone who comes in and asks the tough question. Brian Laundrie, his cause and manner of death came back just a few short days ago, right before our Thanksgiving holiday here in the States. A lot of questions. A lot of people are still, we had our folks, Ed, who said the pulp from the teeth were not good enough for them. They wanted the DNA. We got the DNA. And we got a cause and manner, and everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people are still jumping up and down. So what did we do? Ed Wallace reaches out via text message and email to Dr. Murray Marks, and Dr. Marks says, let me check with my better half. She'll let me know when I can be available. So we got the approval from his better half, and here he is on a Friday night hanging out with us. Ed, what do we got for the folks tonight?
Again, we got the great Dr. Marks, who's volunteering his time and expertise to speak to you all and give you another great education on forensic anthropology. And we're going to talk about Brian's findings from the medical examiner, what the minimum amount of information we received from the medical examiner's report.
Yep. It doesn't get any better than that. So before we introduce Dr. Murray Marks, a forensic anthropologist with a lot of experience in this type of examination, the one that we are going to be talking about tonight of Brian Laundrie, I'm going to play a little clip for our new folks and for folks who maybe are not familiarized with Dr. Murray Marks. So here we go. We're going to show this and we'll be right back.
The bones will tell you everything. They really will. I mean, they're just, they're wonderful because they don't change during decomposition and death. Soft tissues decompose, start right away. And so you lose things like a stab wound or a gunshot wound. And the thing about bone, particularly a head, is that to get the desired effect, you got to breach it. If you're going to kill somebody, you got to get into there and mess up the brain and the blood vessels. And so because of that, bone keeps a memory of what happens to it, whether it's gnawed up or shot or stabbed. I mean, it's a remarkable tissue to work with and have. And like I said, it doesn't go away, So whereas the pathologist has to be right there with the fresh remains, the longer someone's been dead, the pathologist's interest goes and the anthropologist's interest increases. And it used to be at a pathologist looked at the soft tissues and the anthropologist looked at the bones, and the two never met until Bill Bass came along. And Bill really married him because he created and graduated over the past 10 or 15 years, 20 years, probably, 10 or 15 or 25 anthropologists that now have an expertise in it, in rotting soft tissue. Yeah. And so that's really great. Pathologists learning about rotting soft tissue, they get it like, they get it kind of piecemeal. So, you start off in your practice and, he's retiring and you're replacing him, and hey, doc, tell me about decomposition. And he says, you learn it as you go. And so a body comes in, they open the body bag and it's rotten, and they might do a little bit with it. They find out, the detective says, well, that body's been there 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. Well, by the time you retire and pass it on to, the grandson, then you say you got to learn it by doing it, piecemeal. And so you learn about decomposition, and she learns about decomposition based on those cases. Well, the thing with Bill and the body farm, you can lay a body down and you can come back the next day and the next day and the next day. So you can watch the whole series of events. And that's what his students have been treated to.
Unbelievable piece. And I'll go back and watch that time and time again. Just fascinating work by our forensic anthropologists across the globe, not just the United States. We have anthropologists from around the world. So without further ado, Ed, I'm going to let you introduce our guest.
Okay, so we have, again, Dr. Murray Marks, University of Tennessee professor, and works at the Body Farm as well. And he's visiting us from North Carolina, where he's spending a holiday weekend with his significant other. Thank you for being here, Doc.
Well, it's a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me back. I can't believe you've done that, but here I am.
Oh, no, you're a fan favorite. They love you.
Not only are you a fan favorite, Dr. Marks, is you made a promise when I said to you, will you come back? You said, oh yeah. So we called you. We said, hey, he said yes, so we're going to ask him again.
And we know you're a busy man and you couldn't come on when Ian was on from Down Under, but we'll get that all together, and we're going to have one big forensic discipline show with anthropology, pathology, and entomology all together, and we'll all talk about the synergy of all our work.
Fantastic. So we called you back in here. Obviously, Brian Laundrie, the tragedy, murder that had happened with his fiance girlfriend, Gabby Petito. It's a worldwide known case, and it has web sleuths and people, internet detectives all over the world looking at this case. Hundreds of millions of people view this. We received back from District 12 the medical examiner's report along with the forensic anthropologist. Want to just maybe talk about a little bit of what goes on in a situation like this, an exam like this. I know we spoke about it on the last get together, but for some of the new people coming on in or just stumbling across this, what does a forensic anthropologist do when they get bones of any kind, whether it's a partial skull, partial, where you don't have full skeletal remains? How do you go about this stuff? Just let the audience know, maybe just in layman's terms, how this all gets married together.
Well, essentially, you want to recreate before there was any type of trauma. You kind of want to put everything back together to understand something about who this person might be: age, ancestry, sex, stature, all these types of things. You want to provide for law enforcement a biological assessment or a profile if they don't know who the victim is or who the decedent is. And part of that analysis is trauma analysis. Bone keeps a memory of everything that happens to it, as you saw in that thing I did a decade ago. And so anything that happens to that individual is going to be secured in the memory of that bone. And postmortem time, or from death to discovery, is not going to erase it. And one of the key things that the pathologist needs to know for them to fulfill their requirement, their responsibility of talking about cause and manner of death, is that anthropologist keying in on that skeleton to make sense of any type of trauma, any type of blunt force, sharp force, or ballistic trauma, or anything could be accidental. And so that's primarily what the anthropologist is up to in providing information for the pathologist.
All right. Thank you, Doc. And so in this case, on the report itself, it said that the anthropologist had did some reconstruction. So could you explain what the various types of forensic anthropology reconstruction that could have occurred here?
Primarily what that forensic anthropologist was up to was trying to reconstruct the skull or the postcranium, any region of the body where there's breaks, things that are suspicious, things that wouldn't go along with a normal decomposition event. And so, again, since bone keeps a memory of that trauma, what takes place is that you have this anthropologist that is piecing together things to try to understand what the perimortem, or around the time of death, story is. Because that's what the forensic pathologist and anthropologist do, is tell a story about what happened. And so when we have reconstruction, again, primarily for blunt force and ballistic force, there can be a lot of damage to that bone. And it takes some pretty meticulous work to get that back together so that you can understand the dynamic of trauma that took place.
Okay, so depending on the ballistic damage that occurs to a skull, it could be as simple as a hole, a gunshot wound hole, entrance, and then entrance into the cavity, or that ballistic damage could have fractured this skull into many pieces. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's based on the caliber. It's based on the directionality. It's based on the proximity of the firearm or the bullet actually to that surface. Yeah, and so all those things weigh into the fact that, just like you said, it could be a single hole, even a single exit hole, or complete reduction of the skull.
Right. And given the decomp, potential scattering, the critters may have gotten to the skull and so forth. There could be pieces of the skull that are scattered all over the place, and they would have to be as much of it found as possible. And then once that's found, you would then go to work on it back at the laboratory, like putting a puzzle together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a jigsaw puzzle. And again, the autopsy that the forensic pathologists and anthropologists do together starts at the crime scene. So if the recovery is poor, the reconstruction and the result are going to be poor. If the recovery is by an anthropologist or by good crime scene personnel, I mean, that's everything. Again, the autopsy starts there. And so the reconstruction is only as good as the remains that are recovered.
And as we say in the field, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
If I don't give the lab what they need or the anthropologist what they need, then I can't expect great results afterwards.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
I wanted to ask you, Doctor, because I'm old and sometimes I forget things. By labeling cause of death suicide, right? Or wait, was it manner of death suicide, cause gunshot? When they come up with an anthropologist comes up with cause of death suicide, what could be some of the possibilities of what is indicated? What, in other words, what's in front of the anthropologist that could be clear and concise, that could come up with a report like what we see here? And I'm going to add that up onto the screen. When you see such details of a report like this, and of course it's not completely detailed, but it goes over 6 steps, and they ruled the cause of the death to be the manner of death to be suicide. If you could maybe talk on that.
Well, there's a lot that goes in with that cause and manner of death. That's primarily the responsibility of the pathologist. The anthropologist is involved with helping the pathologist come up with a mechanism of death or a mechanism of trauma that allows the pathologist to make that call for cause and manner. Things like, suicide or homicide. I mean, when there's a gunshot wound to the head, very hard to differentiate based on the skeletal remains alone which one of those two things took place. I mean, as far as a close, a muzzle blast and the proximity to the bone, a lot of things can go into the reconstruction that's going to help that anthropologist and ultimately the pathologist make an understanding about whether that was suicide or homicide. Again, the completeness of the remains are crucial to come up with some of those answers.
Doc, when you've examined a skull that had a gunshot wound to it and it was tight contact, have you seen gunshot residues attached in and around the bullet wound entrance, the gunshot wound entrance?
Yes, sir. Yeah, a lot of times, of course, it depends on what type of missiles going in there, and the makeup of that, metal quality, again, velocity, all sorts of things like that. But bone, of course, depending upon where it is in the skull, will capture a lot of that.
Right.
So in X-rays, in electron microscopy, all that material can be picked up to understand, again, entry, exit.
Right. And I explained to the audience in the past about Lecard's theory of transfer. When two objects come in contact with each other and so forth, there's going to be traces of each other's contact when they separate. So,
yes, sir.
Very good. In addition to that, now we have these bones that are scattered everywhere. Okay, in this reservoir, and what I'm sure an incomplete skeleton was collected, and therefore, given that where they're scattered, at this point they had to have conducted additional DNA testing on those bones to determine that in fact they're all coming from one source, as opposed to different people.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that takes place, and then also the fact that there's no repeating elements. What the anthropologist does is start to piece all these things together. And if there's two, parts of the mastoid process on the right side, then something's wrong. You have more than one person presented.
Right.
So, and again, the anthropologist is the expert in skeletal biology to understand all aspects. Does the pelvis match, other things as far as dental development? So there's a whole bunch of things that are going on at the same time that allow the anthropologist to make that assessment. But yes, that can be ascertained with the DNA as far as, they all represent the same person, and so forth.
Right. If you had two right scapulas, then you would know automatically that there are two different people here. All right.
Right. Something's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, something's wrong here. That's right. It's a famous Henry Lee statement from trial. Something wrong here.
And I think that's one of the biggest sticking points with our listening audience is that we don't know exactly how much remains were brought into the laboratory and brought into the exam room. So everyone is left to just speculate. And some folks talk, and you and I got a good laugh, Doc, the last live stream that we did. There's people out there thinking that the dentist took extracted teeth, gave it to the parents, and they scattered them out like it was dog food, and just scattered them out, and they collected them up and said, "Oh, look, I got teeth here. Let's pull out some teeth so he can make a getaway to Tijuana." How practical is that in this day and age, and how hard is that to pull something like that off?
Yeah, that just isn't going to happen. I mean, as far as what's going on as far as that victim is concerned and the decomposition of the remains, and trying to put perpetrators involved that go along with the perimortem experience, or even postmortem things. If someone revisits the scene, all of that's kind of unlikely.
Okay. Now, I'm looking in the chat, and I can see it over and over again. What about the gun? What about the gun? Well, we don't know about the gun. The gun would be helpful. Doc, you can run with that. It would be helpful, but what we don't know, we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, without a weapon, that's really a tough call. I've been to a lot of scenes where there's been close contact destruction, particularly of the cranium. And, without a weapon, short of a suicide note or some type of, psychiatrist report, this individual was this, or this. I mean, you can see here where the post-mortem time becomes very crucial. What happened between the time this person disappeared and the time they were recovered, as far as, water, as far as, anything else that could have changed that environment. So there's so many things that have to go into this that really aren't answered.
So, here's the range of possibilities. The gun is still out there somewhere. Law enforcement has the gun. Okay. Those are our possibilities, and we don't know. It's not law enforcement is under no obligation to tell us all the evidence that they have. Okay. Right. In addition, let's talk about muzzle stamp.
Before you go into that, and I'm sorry to do this because I had this thought. So how are we able to determine suicide if no gun is in our here from the outsiders looking in? No gun is being offered by the FBI or any law enforcement. What could be some of the other possibilities, Doc? Because I got to just get this out of my head and stop these questions from coming to DutyRon.com. What could be some deciding factors of an anthropologist and the team, as you call the team? Everyone gets together, right? It's not just the anthropologist. They confer. And what are some of the other possibilities to indicate on skeletal remains that there was a suicide?
That's a really tough call. There's not much. I mean, other than, the skeletal remains. I mean, the breaks that we see as far as homicide are very clear cut. Whether that's strangulation or whether that's some kind of, again, some bullet wound or some sharp force trauma to ribs or things like that. It's basically a homicide thing. The suicide, that's getting into an entire different area where there has to be some type of a message or a weapon nearby. And without that,
right,
it's pretty tough.
Could there be an indication of, say, he took some type of medication or overdosed himself and then suicide by being eaten by wildlife? I mean, is that a possibility? But how would an anthropologist make that determination? No?
Yeah, no way to know.
Everybody's laughing at me. Okay.
And there's also the placement of the gunshot wound. Where is it relative in the skull? I mean, because obviously most people don't shoot themselves in the back of the head.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's the other thing too. If someone's right-handed, to have an entrance wound on the left side of the head, it's just really uncommon. I mean, most wounds, if they're right-hand dominant, it's going to be on the right side of the body or something like that, except if it's in the chest area. So, getting into the placement of that weapon, it's really tough. Yeah.
And as we know, it's an open case. We're investigators, right? Ed and I are detectives. You are a forensic anthropologist. When you have an open case, the discovery and all of the case folder, the contents therein, is not going to be shared with the general public while it's being investigated. And that's why in this report it says, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is asking that anything pertaining to the medical examiner's investigation of Brian Laundrie may not be made public or released until law enforcement completes their investigation. Now, that's not them saying, ha, 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 we're not going to tell you. It's that we are still working on an active investigation.
Right. It is still active. And a lot of times this can't really be discussed by the anthropologist and the pathologist until the trial's gone. If there's going to be a trial.
Right. In this case, if anything, it's going to be civil because all the parties involved, or there could be criminal charges against a third party, maybe if there's some kind of interference with the investigation, tampering with evidence, or aiding and abetting, and so forth. But getting back to the skull, I was talking about muzzle stamp. Especially with tight contact. I've seen muzzle stamp on skin, but I don't recall seeing muzzle stamp on bone. Have you witnessed that?
I've never seen that. Bone can do a variety of things. Bone can bleed, right? Bone has a blood supply. And when there's certain types of trauma, particularly blunt force, but also some ballistic things, you can find where there's some discoloration that goes along with that residue that we were talking about before. But as far as a muzzle stamp, again, I've seen it at autopsy with soft tissue with the pathologist, but I don't believe I've ever seen it on bone.
Right. And now also that bullet entering now let's back up to that report again. It said, again, if you can put that back up, Ron, it said self-inflicted gunshot wound of the head. Now, if they did suicide by putting the gun in the mouth, would that still be consistent with that terminology, or would it say through the mouth?
Again, that's for the forensic dentist to become a consultant as far as looking at the dentition. But the trauma to the dentition can be a telltale sign of that, type of behavior as well. So, right. and the exit wound can be a little bit different right. placement. If you have an exit wound on the back of the head, it probably came from the front or the side, something like that. So
okay, and then that bullet, if it's a penetrating bullet, would then traverse throughout the cavity of the skull and possibly create additional ballistic impact damage on the inside of the skull on another part based on its trajectory. Sometimes the trajectory could destabilize inside of the brain once it makes entry, right? And then go to Right, and then leave you more evidence inside on the bone.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Mhm. Okay. Any questions, Ron?
Yeah, no, I mean, I do have a couple, but I don't want to take us off of where we're going here. I think these 5 or 6 points in this press release is important. We have Dr. Murray Marks here. Is this somewhat standard of what you'd see as released in a criminal investigation that's still ongoing and active? It brings up the 6 points: seen, response by medical examiner, which is standard, complete examination, and recovered skeletal remains. Now it's saying remains plural. That means we have more than just a partial skull, but it doesn't list it here. Is this common to just be when it's an active investigation to be kind of secretive about what the remains are? It just says skeletal remains.
Yeah, it is. Again, that's up to the type of relationship the forensic anthropologist and forensic pathologist have. Some pathologists, might want to release something,
Right.
prior to the anthropologist's final report. It just depends. And the anthropologist, a lot of times can go through the details of a report, or excuse me, the details of their examination and not include it in a report. Board certified forensic anthropologists write reports of all different stripes. So they can be, very detailed, or they can be, pretty broad. So again, it's not uncommon to see that, but the pathologist knows exactly what was found and what the forensic anthropologist did.
Right.
And line 3 goes over what you talked about: consultation with the forensic odontologist, including dental comparison for identification. So that's your, I think that's kind of like what the gold standard for identification. I think I heard someone say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much, 70, maybe 80% of your identifications are going to come from the dentition. And again, while an anthropologist knows teeth, it's the forensic dentist that actually makes that identification. Really, it's the pathologist that makes the confirmation. The dentist gives all that information to the pathologist, the same way the anthropologist does. So again, yeah, that is standard protocol for the dentist to be the primary source for the identification of the victim.
Excellent. Ed, did you want to say something?
No, but Joe Murray put up a question there. There you go, Doc. So one of our former members of the NYPD, now turned defense attorney, Joe Murray writes, Dr. Marks, wouldn't we have seen mention of an apparent suicide note as a part of the suicide evidence mentioned in the press release?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, where is that? That's an important thing. I mean, that's really kind of the missing piece in all this. Where's some notification of that? Particularly, there's nothing else because the body was scattered, or the remains were scattered. Again, no weapon, post-mortem things taking place. So, that suicide note is a crucial thing.
And I think this press release was done in consultation with the FBI, and I believe the FBI had a big hand in how it was worded. So we may not know, if they have or don't have a suicide note found in that notebook or some other writings.
You're thinking just the way I was thinking, and that's why I was asking the Dr. Marks if this was common the way this is written out. I haven't looked at many of these, but from doing this for about 3 years with covering true crime, I haven't seen a report quite as basic as this.
Well, this isn't really a report. I've read postmortem exams before, and this isn't it. This is just a simple press release.
Now, this line 6, confirmation of the identity of the remains by both dental and comparison and DNA analysis. The DNA analysis, is that coupled in with the dental comparison, or is that the DNA analysis from the anthropologist?
Well, the DNA analysis really takes place somewhere else. There are anthropologists that are very astute with that take part in those labs, that do that type of work. And there are forensic dentists that know that material as well. But primarily, it's a separate thing. So it may or not be included in the odontology report.
Thank you for that. Talks to Animals sends in a super chat, and she or he says, once a matter has been released, can it be changed at a later date? Good question.
Have you ever seen that?
I've not seen that done. Most pathologists, they're pretty sure what they're dealing with, and they'll, weigh everything. Things take time. Some reports take longer than others. They pretty much have it down. I've never seen it change like you, Ed. I haven't seen that change before.
No.
Right.
Okay. So what else can we talk about here?
Well, some of the sticking points too are, the terrain in which Brian Laundrie went into. It was dry when he went in there early on in the month, and then it became wet and the waters rose. And then it went back down 3 or 4 weeks later, his remains were recovered. So we talked about this in the last get together, a total of 3 to 4 weeks of him being out. We don't know when he did what he did, but he went in there, and 3 or 4 weeks before he was recovered. We definitely have a situation that is less than ideal for for forensics, for everybody involved, and it's challenging. It takes a long time, but like the great doc said, they don't really skate around stuff. It takes time to look and analyze and go over and then go over again and have other people look at it and get ideas bounced off of each other, and so it takes time. But a lot of people are baffled by the process and why it took so long for them to come forward with even this press release. But you explained it very well last time we got together. It's not something that just happens overnight.
Yeah, these things do take time. I mean, a scene is a very complex situation, and given the environmental stuff that had happened, as far as the water coming in, if that body's decomposing, if there's parts to it because of what happened around the time of death, suicide, homicide, whatever you're talking about, as far as fragmentation, the insects have been in there changing things, and so there can be quite a bit of dispersal. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, again, I didn't know. I wasn't down there or haven't read anything about it as far as the scene dynamics, but it would seem like several visits would be necessary to be sure things were recovered. So Ron, that's where it comes in, where it takes time for all this stuff to come together. It just doesn't happen overnight.
And let's get back to that notebook. If there was a suicide note in there, first of all, the notebook was partially wet, but they said there were some details that were readily available in the notebook. Okay, so the notebook would then have to be dried out and go through that process and painstakingly documented and pages separated. Now, if they did find some type of writing suggesting a suicide note or indented writing, then they'd need to do handwriting analysis to ensure that, in fact, it was Brian's handwriting that actually wrote the note before they can declare that this is, in fact, a suicide note written by Brian.
Exactly.
They'd have to get exemplars of Brian's original writings. They'd have to get exemplars from the parents and any other person who may have had access to that notebook that could potentially have written a suicide note.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, was it his handwriting? So that's something that, like you say, the exemplars that have to be used, that's exactly where they go with it. So, and again, that's going to take a lab to dry that material out and do it. Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time.
Yep.
Would they also look to get a ballistic expert involved in examining these remains, the skeletal remains, to determine, or does the anthropologist take full charge of that? Is that part of the training of a forensic anthropologist to identify any type of ballistic forensics, or is there somebody else that does that?
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand. As far as the bone trauma that results from this type of energy being, released on bone, we know the trauma, we know how things break and fracture. We know the movement of, a bullet through bone, what it does, given what we think might be the caliber or the proximity, the closeness of it. But we definitely would consult with, or there could be lab specialists that, ballistic experts that, would look at that, take samples of it if there's some embedded. And again, as Ed mentioned before, it's not uncommon for, chunks of that, to be embedded in bone.
Yeah.
So it's a collaborative effort as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is fascinating information, and I haven't seen anybody speak on this, even on the nightly news. I really haven't seen or heard anyone speak on this. So thank you so much. This is just, really valuable information. And we have Dr. Ed Moskowitz, who is in Idaho. He's a family doctor, and he is a huge fan, him and his wife, of Crime Time with DutyRon. And he put a comment in there like earlier, what a great expert you have on here. So he was throwing accolades from one doctor to another. So thank you, Dr. Ed Moskowitz, and thank you for all of your support.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah. And okay.
So Joe Murray again, he loves to throw his money at us. I feel like we should get a poll up and start dancing for him. He says, you are correct, Detective Ed, but there were more than enough time to get that done, especially silly if a apparent suicide note was a factor in determining of the manner and death being suicide.
That's correct. Murray, I talked about in the past about a phenomena that occurs sometimes with headshots called cadaveric spasm, where the body can go into instant rigor mortis. I had such cases, where I had to break fingers, get the permission of the medical examiner's office to break fingers to remove the gun from the hand, a loaded gun from the hand of the persons that were shot in the head, the suicide. And well, we don't have we don't have muscle, we don't have tissue, we don't have ligaments, we don't have cartilage, we don't have any of those things that would keep the cadaveric spasm in place. Now it's just skeletal remains. Obviously, it would have been much easier for us if we had something like that to make the call, because the gun would have been locked in the hand. But most suicides don't do that. Most suicides, the gun drops after the person is shot in the head.
Right.
So
people are used to seeing stuff on TV and in the movies where the gun's still in the decedent's hand. It happens, but more times than not, like you said, Ed, the gun is dropped after the act of pulling the trigger. So again, this is a tough topic to speak about. We brought on the experts to speak about it because the users have been sending in so many questions, so much doubt in the process. And we all talked. The three of us spoke about the professionalism on the forensic side with the police department, and then the professionalism once it gets turned over to the laboratory and to the folks who are doing the exam in the exam room. There is no bounds that are left behind. There's no stone left unturned, is what I'm trying to say. We want to get to an answer. We want to bring justice. We want to bring the perpetrator to justice. We want to bring closure to, or a little piece of closure to the families, to get to a result of what happened to their loved ones. And that's the end goal in all of this, so people have to understand that there's not a lot of mean people in the anthropology, the forensic anthropologists. They want to do the same thing that the police want to do. They want to get answers, and to get those answers, it takes time, and we have to give confidence. We have to give them our support and confidence. We can't just get into that mindset where everybody is corrupt and everyone's trying to cover up something. It just gets to be ridiculous after a while. And I'm not saying, I'm not putting anybody down, because we're all entitled to our opinions, but we need to realize that these folks are separate from the investigators that are out searching out in the field. They have a whole complete different job, and they're professionals and they do it. So I want to make that clear. And no question is, not going to be asked here. So if you have questions, put them in the chat. If we see them, we'll ask them. Navy vet sent in another super chat here and says, when my brother committed suicide, he dropped the firearm immediately after. And I'm so sorry, Navy vet, about your brother. We send you strength, prayers, and positive vibes. But thank you for sharing that with us.
Doc, what would you say if what's your feelings on is it appropriate or inappropriate to try to determine the caliber of the bullet by a bullet hole in the skull?
That's gone around for a long period of time. You can, bullets do a lot of things when they, excuse me, when they leave that muzzle, and depending upon the proximity, how far it is, there's been, a lot of studies trying to measure a hole in the skull and say, oh, it's this caliber or that caliber. I know law enforcement is really interested in, if it's a small hole and it couldn't be something larger, You know, it couldn't be a 9mm, or it couldn't be a 45 or a 38 or something like that if the hole's too small. But like I say, bullets do a lot of things as far as coming apart and such. So that's a really tough call to be able to match, come up with a wound in the skull to a certain caliber. So
Kind of stay away from it is what I'm hearing.
yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
It's not good forensic science.
Right. Well, I'd bring in, you people, and let you guys say, okay, here's what I'm thinking, because you're the experts with that more than me. So
Yeah. I've done a lot of shooting reconstructions where, obviously we can't obtain donated bodies to shoot at, but so we use substitutes like ballistic gelatin, or sometimes even pigs
Yeah.
to shoot dead pigs. They're already dead, folks. So I'm not killing anything. Okay. Okay. And we try to reconstruct what the shooting effects that we see on a particular crime.
Right. So Molly J asks, any idea why the skull is only partial? And we don't have any answer to that. Again, wildlife, amount of time out in the elements, lots of different wildlife could have been messing with the remains over
Gunshot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's no set answer to that, and we don't have access to the case file, so our answer to that would be merely professional speculation, and we don't like to really get involved in that, although we do it from time to time, but we try to keep it within reason. So I know everybody is curious, and I get it. We all want answers, but we don't want to be fed answers that aren't truthful. And that's where things go askew. You don't. The worst part about fake book, and I call Facebook fake book, is because some of the things that stir up in there, some of it is good, but a lot of it is not. And people just run with that, and they say, "Oh, I saw this. Someone speaking about this," and it's just the furthest thing from the truth. So just be careful on that. Again, that's one of the primary reasons why here at Crime Time with DutyRon. And if you're not yet subscribed, consider subscribing. We bring professionals like Dr. Murray Marks on to speak to you from a professional's perspective. He is a forensic anthropologist. I don't know, again, I don't know what the media is doing out there, but I haven't seen anybody in this capacity come on and speak about it. So it's important that we understand that the value of somebody like him, like Dr. Marks here, is tremendous. And it gives us, again, in layman's terms, what the possibilities are, what the overview of an examination of this type with skeletal remains, what it entails. And I think he's covered that in these two videos that we've done very well. So I thank you for that, Doctor.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah. Ed, I think, I want to go, if you have another 10 or 15 minutes, Dr. Marks, I want to go to the chat, the live chat, because there's been so many great people. And I want to say thank you to everyone. If you are new and just coming across this live stream for the first time, let us know in the chat if you're new by just putting new in here. And then also let us know where you're watching, city, state, your country, and we'll like to say hello to some of the folks in the United States and outside. So I'll just scan the chat really quick. And hey, Dr. Murray Marks, what do you like to do on your spare time? Do you golf? What's a forensic anthropologist do? I mean, I'm sorry for that question, but people want to know.
I bike a lot. I run. Don't run as much as I used to, but the
like to
10K,
yeah, wow,
type of thing. But mostly biking and things of that sort. So
excellent. We got Brisbane, Australia checking in. We have a couple of folks from Melbourne.
Hold that thought, Ron. Hold that thought.
Okay.
So, folks from Australia, Dr. Murray has a question for you, because when he was down under, he was called a specific name, and he wants to know if there's any meaning to it. Doc?
Okay, so I was down there as a visiting professor, and several of them called me Muzza. Is that is that kind of a shortened nickname for Murray?
Okay, Muzza. So he was called Muzza when he was over in Australia. So, any of my Australian friends have anything? Is that like is that a good word? Was somebody saying something bad about him? We want to know. Anybody? Bueller? Well, I'm still waiting. It's a little bit delayed. So let's see. New from Brisbane. Good to see you. Thank you for joining. So nobody's answered it yet. Somebody's laughing. Smee is laughing.
Uh-oh.
Brave question, says Molly. So it's a nickname. White. Who said that? White Witch. Sarah said it's a nickname. I don't know if she's from Australia, but she's saying it's slang for your name. Okay, here she's from Australia, so it says slang for your last name. I'd say. So these folks knew your first and last name, obviously. So,
They did, yeah. Well, it was my friend Ian who was on your program.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
He's either laughing at us right now, watching, or he's saying, "Oh, okay, this is good that they're asking about that."
Okay, come on, folks. We have Dr. Murray here. You have any questions for him? This is your chance now to speak to him directly and put your questions in the chat.
Yep, because I just looked at the emails, and all of the emails that came in, which were quite a few, we've already answered. Doc has already answered, so I'm not going to get redundant with. Thank you for the folks who sent in to the website the questions, but he's answered all the questions already.
So Smee says it means handsome and intelligent.
I'll take that.
There you go. The great doctor has taken it. He's taken that. No problem. So here's a question coming in from Rose. DutyRon and Ed, will Gabby's family be allowed to gain access to the information regarding Brian's suicide? It's a good question. But I don't think so, Ed, right? That's part of the criminal investigation. I don't think that they would just hand that over to the family. I'd probably say no to that.
Yeah, that's up to the FBI, and I doubt it though. But here's the question: do they give tours at the body farm?
Ooh.
Well, at mine I do. The one that I have, and I've taken people out there that are interested, and I'll do that, and again for an educational purpose. There's no pictures taken, there's none of that type of thing, but there's people interested in this process, and it's an educational facility. We honor and respect the families, and of course the individuals that are donated, and to that end, we keep things on the professional level. I mean, like again, no pictures, no parties, none of that kind of stuff. But a lot of times I'll give a lecture first, and then if they want to go through there.
What I wanted to ask you, a piggyback on that, Doc. I am the law enforcement liaison for EquiSearch Midwest. That's the search and rescue group. And I don't know if you're familiar with them, but Tim Miller, I've had him on my show here with us. He's from Houston. He is the founder of EquiSearch, the nonprofit that searches for the missing. And he had asked me, and along with the co-director of the Midwest chapter in Ohio, they had asked me, hey, because we're searchers, we find skeletal remains. They have never, messed up an investigation for a law enforcement, and they've been out on over 2,000 of these. But he asked me, he said, if we wanted to, pay to send some of our guys through, recovery remains, skeletal remains, do they do stuff like that? So that's a question that I have for you. Do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Just reach out to me, and I'll, we can arrange things. So yeah,
excellent.
I've done a lot of work with the cadaver dog.
Yeah, they have their whole team. So that's great for me to know. I'm putting that in my pocket, and I will reach out to him on Monday. Also, Ed, well, I'm probably not Ed, but I would be interested in just coming and doing a walkthrough down there as a retired professional, not to go up, not to take videos, not to take pictures, but I personally myself would love to see what the great work that you guys are doing. I'd love to walk through the lab if that's possible, and just see for myself the great work that you guys do. And then I'd take you out to dinner after that.
Obviously, yeah. The thing is, it's an educational thing, and the more open we are, the more transparent we are with the public, with my colleagues in law enforcement, my colleagues in forensic anthropology, dentistry, and pathology, then all of this makes more sense. Okay.
You got a question right there. What education is required to become an anthropologist?
A lot of desire. Okay. And what happens is you go through undergraduate years and you major in anthropology, and then you have to do a graduate program. You can do a master's, PhD. There's quite a few master's level forensic anthropologists out there, and they have a qualifying examination in the American Board of Forensic Anthropology, the same way that the doctoral components do as well. So again, take 4 years of college and then at least 2 years of graduate work.
Wow. Yeah. So it's a lot of dedication, and like he said, you got to really want to do this. This is not
Right.
something
And,
that.
yeah, and a real important piece, of course, is to have a mentor in law enforcement and a medical examiner, so that you find out what's going on at the scene, and how all this stuff fits together. So both at the crime scene, with the medical examiner, and then if you have to go to court, and that's a whole other program we could talk about.
Right.
Being responsible for it, the jury, talking about, resolution for families. How do you hold up a skull of a victim? Looking at a jury is one thing, but when the parents of that victim are sitting there in the courtroom, and you have the skull of their daughter or son, explaining things, it's quite a humbling experience. So.
Oh yeah. Someone asked in the chat, Sarah Claire says, have you studied or seen ancient bodies?
Ancient, thousands of years, if that's considered ancient. Yes, my heritage or my early work was with Native American prehistoric archaeology.
Wow.
Which was very gratifying. And then later on, working with the Native American community, working with the historic African American remains, and those church elders and things like that, in returning those remains and giving them answers that they have about their ancestors. So if ancient's several thousand years old, then I would say that.
Yeah, the answer is yes to that.
Yeah, a question here from Stephanie Blooms. It says, where have you traveled to work in the field in anthropology?
My work has been Central America, did some human rights work in Panama, and then in Australia. Most of it has been, of course, US based, but again, did work in Australia with my friend Ian, actually as a visiting professor over there, and then the human rights work in Central America.
Here's an interesting question. They want to know if bones float.
Certain times they do. It depends on the mineral component. For the most part, they're going to sink. Of course, it depends on a lot of aspects of that dynamic, that water, whether it's salt water, whether it's fresh water or brackish. They can move, but they are eventually going to settle through that water column, and particularly as the body decomposes. Depending upon where you are in that water column, whether it's a river or a lake or Niagara Falls or a sedentary pond, all those things can move around in a variety of ways. But as far as just putting bones out on the surface of the water, they might for a while, but then they're eventually going to sink.
Yeah, they'll get waterlogged and sink.
Yeah.
Someone's dogging me. Billy Ashley says, who in their right mind would want to go to a body farm? Isn't it kind of morbid? I don't think so. I think it's educational. And I think it's something that, when you're in the law enforcement field and you've seen so many people in different, I don't know what that was. That wasn't one.
Wow.
That might have been on the doctor's end, because I
think
don't know.
It was.
That's a fun. I've seen so many dead human bodies in different states of decomposition that, for me, I'm fascinated with the study, with anthropology, with the odontology, and all the things that we've been speaking about. So I was the one who put that forth, and no, I don't think it's morbid at all. Doc, you got any feelings on that?
Well, the deal is that there's a lot of individuals that are interested in this process. Law enforcement primarily, because it answers the question. Not all decedents, not all victims are fresh remains. That if there's time between death and discovery, soft tissue changes. And in order to understand that, in order to give resolution, identification, so that family members can move on with their life and settle up with a grieving process, we need to know what happened. So it's not for everybody. Whoever asked that question, obviously it doesn't make any sense to you, but still in all, there's a lot of people that want to know what happened, or what takes place. And so we're lucky to really have these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. Shaz K says, are any body farms in Australia?
Well, actually, Ian has one, but it's not there. I don't believe there's any humans there. He has studied pigs for 25 or 30 years. I'm not sure there's anything else there, particularly in the in the eastern part of the country. But like I said, Ian Dador has done the primary work in Western Australia with pigs.
Wow.
Angela Ing wrote, if you've ever worked with mummified body, do they try to rehydrate the bodies to work on them?
Typically what takes place, I've never done any ancient remains like that as far as resurrecting tattoos and other soft tissue things, particularly looking at wounds as well. When we get desiccated remains that are mummified, our goal is pretty much to get rid of that soft tissue or get rid of that desiccated tissue. So I personally have never worked on any mummified remains.
I have, and we were trying to we look at the fingers to try to see if there's any friction-rich detail there, and if so, then
exactly.
we try to rehydrate those areas. Sometimes we'll put a little tourniquet on the fingers and inject it with filler and try to plump the fingers back up. Sometimes we get permission from the pathologist to excise the fingers and then put them in a formula to help with that as well, to soften it up and try to obtain the fingerprint information. And again, we use infrared photography to bring out tattoos and things of that nature that can't readily be seen because of the mummification process.
Right, alternate light sources as well to bring out those tattoos. And essentially what they were using was Dawn dishwashing solutions.
Yes. And sometimes some leather softeners too on the outside. But here's a question I get all the time about CSI shows. Do you watch any anthropology shows on TV?
It's just too much Hollywood.
Right. Because they're talking about our friend Kathy Wright and Bones.
Yeah, and that's written for Hollywood, and most of what Kathy says is from a professional standpoint. And she's been a forensic anthropologist for years and knows everything about it. But again, there's Hollywood that has to have within an hour, the beginning of a problem and have it, done at that point in time. Yeah. As you guys know, these forensic investigations take time. They take, weeks, months for all these experts to coordinate their findings. So, I really don't watch them. Yeah. I wish things worked that way, but they really don't. So
I've watched a few just for shits and giggles, and I laugh myself out. I can't watch this no more. It's just too ridiculous.
Yeah. Right. It's like NYPD Blue, and
I think NYPD Blue is the closest to reality NYPD show I've ever seen outside of Barney Miller.
Absolutely, but it is it is entertainment, and there has to be some parts of it that is sensationalized, and it makes it so it's good for the viewers. So I wanted to say thank you for the super chats quickly. Stacy C, and then Lynn sent in a $20 super chat. It just went away, but thank you for all of the folks who just understand this. When you're sending in the super chats, we appreciate them. They're tremendously appreciated. But if the doctor's talking or if Ed's talking and we're on a point, it's hard to break it down and stop the whole conversation, because it just stops the continuity of this whole conversation. I don't want that to happen. So I'm doing it for the benefit of you guys. And now when there's a break in the action, I'm acknowledging it. So anyone that we missed, we greatly appreciate it. We apologize. There's a really good question that came in. Somebody asked, and here it is. Kirsten Mahoney says, can you donate organs, then have the body donated? And I think we talked about this on the last show, but could you answer on that? Because she maybe wasn't here.
Yeah, that can definitely take place. A lot of times the bodies have gone through organ donation services, whether it be eyes, bone is taking quite a bit of the time. So there are several times when we don't get a whole bunch because of ribs and long bones taken, but definitely organs. Yep, organs can be taken out because we pretty much don't do anything with those except allow them to decompose to understand processes. So,
And,
yeah.
and thank you for that, Doc. And do the families get the remains back, the bones, if they want it, of their loved one?
Absolutely. I mean, they're on loan for us to study. But at any point in time, if someone wants to know what's happening, I mean, I talked to probably a handful of people who want to know, did anybody come and study my loved one? Did anyone come and look at the skull or the long bones or anything else? What did someone learn from looking at the bones of my loved one? So I talked to several people that check in routinely on that. There's been several where, like I said, Uncle Jack shows up and said, well, I'd have buried her, and the family went ahead and rushed without without consulting with me. So there's all sorts of different avenues where the bones are returned to family. Now, we don't own them. They're given to us so that we can learn something, but every family has a different type of a grieving process and acceptance. So we, abide by that.
That's fabulous. That's great. That's great.
There was a good question here about at the body farm. Besides the indigenous wildlife that come to nibble on the bodies, do you do any studies where you actually expose the body to an animal like a pig or so forth to see what they would do?
No, we haven't done any of that. I'm pretty sure that the Forensic Anthropology Center over at UT hasn't done that, but I'm not really sure exactly. I just want to keep everything. Where the body is complete. We don't dissect parts off. We let the body decompose, and all the bones are together, so that if family someday wants their remains, they get all of them. There's not fingers or toes in some carnivore's gut somewhere, or something else like that. So we've kind of prevented that. Now, there's been studies with pigs looking at other critters, like cats or dogs or deer, roadkill, that type of a thing.
Now you keep the bones of once you're done with the bones, you keep all of them all cataloged and boxed up and on the shelves. And if the family wants them back, they can get them back.
Absolutely, yes. And again, I can't send a box of bones to a family. They have to tell me what funeral home. I'll send the bones to that funeral home, and then the family can decide they want to cremate or bury or something like that. Or I can have that done here and then send them the remains, the ashes or whatever. So
that's great.
Yeah, Ron, I have another question. They're asking also. So when you die, if you donated your body, what's the process? How does the body get to the body farm? Who's responsible for that?
Well, there's several avenues. It depends on where people are. There's the best thing to do is it's hard to find those sources. If someone wants to email me, they can do that. I'll be glad to answer because I know the forensic anthropologists that have those facilities, as far as Texas, North Carolina, these different areas. A lot of my colleagues have, small operations that are going on. So it depends on where this person is. But I just have paperwork they sign and there's a witness and that's pretty much it. So it's very straightforward. Again, does that family need a death certificate? And that's another layer that has to be taken care of. So there's a formality to it.
Do they have to bear the expense of getting the body to your body farm?
It depends on where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Now in Tennessee, Georgia, places nearby, there's no expense at all. It depends on the medical examiner. It depends on if there's transfer availability. So, but then again, if you're going to cross state lines and go several places, then that might be more complex. It's dealt with on a case-by-case basis. No one is making any money off such a thing like this. It's a donation to science. A lot of fresh remains go to dentistry or medicine or something like that. If there's any decomposition, of course, that's what we're interested in having. So,
fascinating information, and this is just great to have a discussion about this because this stays out there. The replay is always there. It's going to be there for years to come. If anybody wants to contact Dr. Murray Marks, I will include in the description of this live ways to contact him. He's okay with it. Just keep it questions related to the study of the body farm. So he's not there to chit chat, but he's there to give you information when it comes to this. I want to say, just on behalf of Crime Time with DutyRon and the whole community here, Dr. Marks, how thankful we are for you taking out this hour of your night on a Friday. I want to say thank you to your significant other, to your girlfriend, for lending us you on a Friday night. She was gracious to come on before we went live, and we got to meet her, and she's wonderful. So thank you, thank you, thank you on behalf of Crime Time and DutyRon with Ed Wallace. Ed, you got any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Again, thanks, Murray, for coming on. I appreciate it. And I owe you a dinner and some drinks. And the next time I'm down your way, I will pay up.
All right. I'm waiting for that.
Okay. If you ever come into New York, you can get it here too.
All right. We might do that.
Any final words for the audience, Dr. Marks?
Well, thank you guys for inviting me to talk about this. It's such an important topic. There's so much that there is to share. I wish I could share everything I know. It's been a long road. I've enjoyed the work I do. I cannot wait to provide families with resolution and peace. And if I can do just a fraction of that, then I've been a success.
Amen to that. Yes. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi.
Yeah, he's pretty brilliant.
Oh, go away.
You know what? I can't even argue with you on that, because I agree 100%. But what's beautiful about him is that he is brilliant, but he's easy to talk to, and he's easy on the eyes for the ladies, for my ladies in the
Absolutely,
audience.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant.
Well, and I will agree, easy on the eyes.
Thank you, Murray.
And I'm very lucky. My eyes are on him all the time.
Did we lose the sound?
Yeah, no, you didn't lose the sound. I can hear him. So excellent. Thank you for chiming in. That was great. I didn't think that you would even come in to say anything, but thank you for that. And we want to just say to everyone, thank you for the replay viewers. Thank you to the live chatters. Thank you for everyone who has positively interacted here with Ed Wallace, myself, Dr. Murray Marks. Ed's having some kind of difficulties with hearing. I'm going to try to add him back. But I just want you guys to know that your questions are just, none of them are not worth us looking at. But on a 1 hour show, it's hard to get to each and every one of the questions. And if we see something that you really need to be answered, all right, you're back, Ed. If we see something that needs to be answered, like I said on the last stream, I will forward it to Dr. Murray Marks. I have his email. If it's an important thing that you want to have an answer to, I'll try to get the answer from him and then get right back to you on that. So as I like to end all of these live streams, God bless the world, God bless the United States of America, and God bless each and every one of us here in the chat, and all victims of crime and their families across the globe. We give thanks and praise to all of our law enforcement, our military, and all of the forensic folks behind the scenes that work tirelessly to bring justice for our loved ones. I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Thank you to my guest. Thank you to everyone being here. Good night from New York City.
Stay safe, folks.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Doc.